All right, welcome fans to another edition of Ranking the Albums. And today I have with me none other than Mr. David Hens. Welcome.
Thanks again. It's been a couple months, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on here. We're going to talk some Journey today. Huge catalog, 15 albums spread throughout their whole career here. And yeah, we got a lot to talk about here, so let's get rolling. I just want to real quick a couple notes about Journey before we go back and forth with our rankings. Interesting note on them is every single studio album release has charted on the Billboard charts. That's something you usually don't always see with a lot of bands, especially later in their career. Um, Six top 10 albums for the band, eight platinum albums. First song that I have ever came into to get to know the band was Open Arms. That seemed to be the one that where I woke up and realized who they were. And the first album I ever bought was obviously Escape. That's about the time frame when they really exploded, and I was about right around there is when I started listening to rock music on a regular basis. So that's why those two, the song and the album, are big for me there. And what about you? How did you get into Journey?
Obviously, I wasn't around for the prime years, but I remember getting into them as a kid, probably the mid to late '90s, and I think the first CD I had was probably the greatest hits, and then my favorite song was always "Wheel in the Sky." So
Nice. All right, so let's take her away. We're gonna start off by doing number 15 to 11. We're gonna just do those five albums there, and then I'll do my 15 to 11, and then we'll go back from 10 on down. So go
okay,
ahead and take
yeah,
her away. Mhm.
all right, yeah. My number 15 is "Trial by Fire" from '96. I went back and listened to this album again. Kevin Shirley's production is okay, but there's really just nothing that memorable on this album. You can tell that it almost felt like forced. It had been 10 years since the previous album, and Perry sounds okay on it, but the band's heart's just not in it. I remember I think they even gave him an ultimatum at the time, like they wanted him to get surgery or be replaced, and he didn't want to get the surgery, so that's why he ended up just being ousted. But yeah, there's really nothing that memorable on this album that makes me want to go back to it. So, all right,
Okay.
yeah. So then number 14 is "Raised on Radio" from '86. Steve Perry produced this one himself. It's okay, but I don't know. I think like Randy Jackson, they brought him on bass in this album. It's decent, but for me, like the prime Journey years are definitely like the '70s to early '80s, and like by that point, I don't know. It's okay, but and then 13 would be "Freedom," their most recent album. I feel like it came out with kind of a whimper, like it was out, but they didn't really hype it up that much. And even when they played Buffalo back in March, they didn't play anything off of it. I know they had been playing like one song off of it on the tour, but then the night that they were here, we didn't get that song. So
Yeah.
I feel like then there's no like local radio support for it. They don't play anything off of it. So I feel like unless you went out of your way to seek it out, most people probably, unless they're following the band closely, you wouldn't even know it came out. So, which is unfortunate because it's not that bad, but I feel like a lot of those later albums they got too long. Like it's like 73 minutes, which it probably doesn't need to be that long. They could have shaved maybe like half of it, and it would have been more succinct. But yeah, and then 12, I went with "Generations," the second album with Steve Augeri.
Mhm.
No, again, it's another 73-minute album. Probably didn't need to be that long, but it's the band shared vocals on that album too, which is an interesting kind of departure for them, and which it's cool. But I think when it came out in '05, I wasn't really listening to Journey, so I didn't really get into these albums until later. So because I wasn't, with Perry out of the band, my interest kind of waned a little bit. But I went back and listened to both of those albums that he sang on recently, and I think they're pretty solid. They're polished. It's not like as rough around the edges as some of those earlier albums, but they're enjoyable. And then for 11, I went with Arrival. I think it's easily the strongest album of the post Perry era in a lot of ways. I think it's another 73-minute album. That seemed to be like the magic number for them in those years. But there's some really solid songs on there. It's definitely kind of almost like some of them kind of come off as like a soft rock production in a lot of ways, but like it's not as edgy as some of the earlier stuff. But Neal Schon's playing is great, and Dean Castronovo came in on drums for that album for the first time, and he's been a great contributor ever since. So yeah, that's my number 11 as Arrival.
All right. Yeah, you said a lot there. And you're gonna see what my choices here that we definitely overlap on a couple of these. So I'll start off with my number 15, which is one of the albums you didn't mention yet. So that means you like it a lot better than what I like it as. But I chose the second album from 1976, Look Into the Future. Only reached number 100 on the charts. Guitarist George Tickner, who played on the original album, left before the recording was started. He did write a couple songs, I guess, but other than that, he was out the door pretty quick. Nothing memorable on the album is the main problem I have. I mean, yeah, you can listen to it if it's good background music, maybe. But as far as something catching your attention, it just sits in the background and just plays through. Nothing catches your attention, and that's
Mm.
exactly what that does for me, at least. So that's my 15. My number 14 was what your 15 was, I believe. That was Trial by Fire. It's got to be probably the most bland Journey album there is because to me, it
Yeah,
seems like all the songs are the same in a way. I don't know. They're all ballady and slow, and I don't know. It's just nothing here to really light my fire. No catchy hooks.
yeah,
Unlike
and
the
they didn't even tour on that album either. So
yeah. At that point, then yeah, Perry was gone, so they really
yeah,
couldn't. But
mhm.
yeah, and I don't even think have they ever played anything live off of it even afterwards. I don't believe.
Probably not. Yeah.
Maybe the one hit that they had off of it. I don't even know to tell you the truth. But they can bury that one and it won't. And it's sad because that album brought the Escape lineup back together, with
Mhm.
Steve Smith and Ross Valerie because they had gotten booted out back when Raised on Radio came out. So, and this was the first album since then. So, but it wasn't enough to booster it. Oddly enough, probably because of the attention and the lack of long period of time, it did reach number 3, and it probably came out at a time when there wasn't a lot of other releases out there. So it did fairly well in sales. It reached platinum still, but it's got to be one of the weakest platinum albums I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's number 14. Number 13 was Generations. As much as I like Steve Jerry, um, I think what kills it are all these other guys singing on it. Really, he was
Yeah.
Jerry was having like a lot of vocal issues and straining his voice. So, and he admitted that later on down the road. They didn't admit it at the time, but that's why all these other guys were. I mean, when you got Ross Valerie and Neal Schon singing,
Mhm.
you got a problem. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Dean does a great job on his songs, but Dean is a great singer and he's noted
Yeah.
for it. He did a lot of Journey songs live in concert over the
Yeah.
years, and he just kills on the Perry songs. It's just
Mhm.
amazing how they never thought about ever just replacing him with Dean because he can handle the catalog, believe it or not.
Yeah. I think it would have been a good move.
Yeah, but I guess they wanted a solid drummer, and his drumming's pretty good too. So Generations number 13 only reached at number 170, and that was pretty much the last hurrah for Steve Augeri, as that album just didn't do nothing like they had hoped it would do. Number 12 is actually I got Eclipse at 12. That's the 2011 release, the second album with Arnell singing. Yeah, I did reach number 13. It's more of a guitar album as opposed to the type of album you would expect from Journey with a lot of keyboards and stuff. It doesn't really have they're not to the forefront like a lot of the previous album, Revelation. It's nothing like that. Revelation is definitely slip between night and day difference between the
Mhm.
follow up and Revelation. So Eclipse is just another one. There's a couple of good highlights on it. Don't get me wrong, but for the most part, let me see what I had down here for Eclipse off the top of my head. Anything is possible. Someone. The rest of the songs all kind of seemed the same. Nothing stood out. So that was Eclipse. number 12, and then my number 11 is oddly enough Evolution, which came out in 79. Um, I was kind of surprised to look back and see that it gone 3 times platinum, reached number 20 on the charts. Was the follow-up to Infinity, which was the one that really put him on the map. I just don't feel that album is anywhere in the ballpark, uh, near its predecessor, Infinity. I just don't see it. Nothing on there. I mean, there's a couple good songs. Obviously the Just the Same Way was a great song between Perry and Rowley singing co-leads on it, and then you got Love and Touch and Squeezing, which I know it's a popular Journey song, but to me, it's never been one that I really enjoyed. It's kind of a middle of the road song for me, but the rest of the album, there's not too much there that really helps bring it any higher than that. But that was the first album to feature Steve Smith, who replaced Ansley Dunbar. So that was it for Evolution. So there you got number 15 to 11 for me. And that will take us to our top 10, and we'll just go back and forth here. What do you got for number 10?
10, I went with Revelation from '08. I mean, pretty much a lot of what you said about the album. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, Where Did I Lose Your Love? I thought was a pretty good song. Wildest Dream is pretty good, but I mean, I like Arnell's voice, but I mean, it's not like if I'm going to listen to Journey, I probably wouldn't reach for one of the albums that he sang on right away. But he's I can see why they brought him into the band because he fits. But yeah, it's an okay record. Plus, it was like one of those Walmart exclusive albums, which is kind of weird in itself. But
What's your take, the difference between Arnell and Steve Augeri? If you had to take a preference, who would you pick over the other?
I for the individuality, I think I'd pick Steve Augeri only because he sounds like himself. I feel like Arnell tries a little too hard to sound like Perry. He's basically just like because if you went to when you see him live now, I mean it's almost identical to the way Perry. It's like he's actively trying to sound that way, but he doesn't really he doesn't bring a lot of his own style or personality to the music. He's basically just doing a carbon copy, which it works for what it is. But I feel like Augeri had a little more of himself in the material.
Gotcha. Yep. All right. So let's see. That's your number 10. Mine is Next, which is the third album. It came out in good old number 1977. Reached only number 85, but at that point, that was, I believe, the band's highest charting album up to that point. So, with this one, it's similar to the second album, Look into the Future, in my estimation. They're kind of in the same ballpark as I mean, obviously Next is a little bit better because I ranked it higher because I enjoyed a couple of the highlights. What I liked from Next was People and Here We Are. Those are the two tracks for me that helped make this album uh, much, a little bit higher than Look into the Future. Um, but once again, nothing great. In my estimation, the good Journey albums for me don't really start until we get into my top 7. But this one's more on an average Journey album in my estimation. So that's how it ranks for me. All right. So what do you got for number 9?
Number 9, I have Eclipse. Again, it's a solid record. I feel like they're just kind of churning them out at this point. Like there's really not that much separating any of the newer ones. They're just kind of like they are interchangeable in a lot of ways. But like pretty much any like my 9 through 12 could be in a different order depending on the day. There's not a lot separating them, but yeah, again, I think it's better than Revelation, but it's still not anything that yeah, I don't think it's like if you for the classic Journey fans, I don't really think they get into it as much because I like people who like Journey and go see them live. I don't know if they're necessarily buying the new records. I think they just go to hear the old stuff. So
Yeah, you're right about that because, if you look at it, Journey's only made like one album over the last 11 years, so
yeah,
I mean, so that would prove that point right there without even
mhm,
having, you didn't really even have to
yeah,
say it. Like you said, most
mhm,
people go to hear the hits is what they want to
yeah,
hear. and sadly enough, the band is like accommodating to a point, and they should be digging deeper into their catalog. It's a shame they got so many good songs. They can definitely throw in a couple old tracks for for the diehards and mix it up a lot more. People are
Hmm.
still going to go for the same reason, so I just don't understand it myself.
Yeah.
But what can you say? All right, so mine is Freedom, number 9, which you just mentioned a few albums ago there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to, here we are touring for the album, and yet they're only playing like one song on any given night at most on it, which is weird. But then again, I mean, when we seen them, I don't know if what happened the year before, but I know when me and you see them, it was actually celebrating more about celebrating the 50 years of Journey. So it
Yeah.
sounded like even though the new album was out, they weren't really pushing it or touring for it. They were touring for the 50-year thing more so. So that would probably be the reason why they're not playing anything off of it, really.
Hmm.
Because when you got 50 years of material and it's a 50th anniversary tour, do you really want to hear something new? Good bathroom break song. But Freedom to me, um, I was actually quite surprised. The beginning of the album is actually the better part of the album. It's like the first 5 songs are decent. They're not great, but they're decent enough where I can, go ahead without having to skip any tracks until maybe I get up to about track 6 or 7. But um, so the first 5, I saw they're all kind of neck and neck. To pick one out of the 5, maybe Don't Give Up on Us. Maybe I like that one just a wee bit more than any of the other ones. Um, but for the most part, you know, to me it's an improvement over Eclipse because they're sounding a little bit more like themselves, but then again now they're sounding a little bit too ballady. They're back in the other aspect again instead of you know kind of mixing it up and coming up with a really good overall feel album. They're kind of like all they keep all the songs sound similar again type situation.
Hmm.
So, but interesting note is Randy Jackson returned on bass after many, many years there on the album. And
Yeah.
Narada Michael Walden came in on drums and a couple other things. And he also helped produce it along with John Kane and Neal. So, and then he was out the door pretty quick after that. Then Dean came back. So, interesting journey. The revolving door never stops there. All right, what you got for 8?
8, I went with Look into the Future. For of like the early albums that they like before like they became the Journey that people became to love. I think that, I mean, this is the weakest of the first few. I mean, they toned down the prog and like the jazz elements from the first 2 records a little bit, but I mean, it's they definitely went with some experimental material on this one, but it's yeah, it's not one I go back to that often, but because I mean, the difference between the first album and this one is definitely pronounced. That you can tell that they didn't want to quite do the same thing. They wanted to get a little more like appealing to a broader audience. So yeah, that's. But again, for the '70s, it's a decent album.
You definitely could tell it was that's where it belongs.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, so my number 8, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. My number 8 was the first album, the first Journey, 1975, the debut, reached number 138. Similar type things you just mentioned pretty much sums it up, belongs in the 70s. This album starts off pretty good with Of a Lifetime, and then for near the end of it, I actually like the last 3 songs, including that instrumental Topaz was pretty cool. But yeah, to me now this is the highest that I have any of the first 3 Journey albums. So to me, this is the best one. Um, it just stands out a lot more than the second and the third one does for me. But you know, it is what it is, and that takes us to number 7.
Yeah. 7, I went with Frontiers. Again, I like this album a lot. I think Separate Ways is a great way to open the album. I mean, Chain Reaction is great. Edge of the Blade, open side 2, I like that a lot. I think they should have included "Ask the Lonely" on this album instead of putting it on that "Just the Two of Us" soundtrack, because that would have made the album even better. But yeah, I mean it's a great record. I like this is like from here on is where like the best Journey albums are for me. So this is one I still go back and listen to quite often, and they still play quite a bit of it live. I mean, "Faithfully" is obviously probably the biggest song off of here. So
Yep. Yep. I'll have more to say about that one in a little bit here. For right now, I'm jumping to Departure for number 7. Came out in 1980. This was the follow-up to Evolution. Reached number 8. Also went 3 times platinum. Um, Last studio album to feature Greg Rowley, album-wise, he did do on that soundtrack they had, Dream, and that was the last thing he actually did going out the door. But we didn't count that one in here because it's more a soundtrack album and not a an actual studio album with Journey. Totally different feel and whole atmosphere with that album. But yeah, Greg Rowley only ended up doing one song, singing one lead vocal on this album, Departure, and that was Someday Soon, which was a decent song. Um, Any Way You Want It, kicks it off. That's the one song that everybody knows from here. But a couple of the ones that stand out for me, People and Places, very interesting song. And I'll pick one more, and that will be Where Were You? I don't know. Where was I? But yeah, that was a good song off the album. Um, Much improvement compared to Evolution, and this is where I mean, this is where the band really starts stepping into the twilight of their career because the next couple albums really, as you'll see, they're coming up eventually on my list here. So, all right, number 6.
yeah, number 6, I went with "Evolution." Again, I like it. I think they had Roy Thomas Baker on production for this album. He does a pretty decent job. I mean, "Just the Same Way" and "Love and Touch and Squeezing" are the big songs off of it. I mean, it's a good album, but definitely not as good as "Infinity." I feel like they kind of almost made like the same album, but it's just not quite. The songs aren't quite as strong. So, but
Yeah.
I do like the album cover, so that's probably my favorite thing about it. I always liked it.
Would you call that probably the best album cover for Journey?
It's yeah, it's definitely one of the best.
I don't know if I could. No, I guess I don't know. I'd have to look at them and decide. But that's
Yeah.
interesting. It's kind of like picking the best Yes album cover. It's almost impossible because Roger Dean does such a great job on album covers, and they had the same guy doing their album covers too for the first while, and then they
Mhm.
kind of changed it up. But yeah, interesting though. All right, so my number 6 is going to be this Arrival, which is the first album with Steve Augeri. It also brings in drummer Dean Castronovo, who played with Neal and Jonathan Cain in Bad English, and also Neal and Hardline, right before in the years before that. So they brought Dino in, and I think this album is definitely kind of like very underrated, because it seems like how it is with Steve Perry, everybody, oh, it's got to be Perry or no Journey. But I think Jerry did a great job on this album. Um, and the songs, it's a good variety of type songs on here. I mean, I remember talking to him about some of these songs on here, and it seems like he don't remember half of them either. It's just kind of surprising, because he sang on them. But highlights for me all the way. Great song. Um, Signs of Life. And of course, Higher Place is one that once in a while you might hear the band still play that one here and there. Um, but We Will Meet Again closes out the album. That's another highlight on the album. But yeah, I think it's like you said, I think this is one of those ones where I don't know why they have to pick 15 songs on an album, but if they would have picked the best 10 or 11 on this album would have done a lot better for me. But there is some filler on there, which kind of brought it down a little bit, but still not bad because it still made number 6 for me. All right, so that was my 6, and that takes us to the top 5.
Yeah. My number 5 is Next.
Oh wow.
I like this album a lot. I think Spaceman is great. I like Karma a lot. I'm I mean Neal Schon coming out of Santana in the early days. I feel like he was still with those first few Journey albums. He was kind of continuing that a little bit. And I mean it's not for everybody because it's a lot of just like experimental jamming. But it's I mean when I put this album on today, it definitely sounds like the '70s. But it's just a and like people who are familiar with the commercial Journey later on probably don't even know that this album exists or they just don't have any interest in it. But it's I just love I love Neal Schon as a player in general. So I mean, pretty much anything he plays on him is going to be something I want to listen to. So, and he was his soloing was always on point. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's exactly how you described it was perfect there. Like how you mentioned, it's totally different than the journey that most of us know, but
mhm.
it was the last album of that, and then came Infinity. So changes were on the rising there. Changes were rising, and that's what happened um, following that release. All right, so that was your 5. I'm going with Frontiers for my number 5. Came out in 83, reached number 2, 6 times platinum, so that makes it the band's most second biggest selling album out of the studio albums. Um, you know, like you said, that album. You start off with the song the band's actually opened up many, many, many shows with, obviously separate ways. I think every cover band in the world tries to do separate ways. Um, it's just crazy. That song is
Yeah.
so big, but you know,
Well, like Chris Daughtry and Lizzie Hale just came out with a version of it.
oh boy, I didn't hear that one yet.
Yeah, you can look that up on YouTube. It's interesting.
Is it not close to the original, or they change?
Okay, they use so almost more of like a synth beat kind of a little bit, which is kind of weird,
Huh,
but
I w-
the vocal's good. So
okay. I'll have to look that up. So yeah, so separate ways, big song. Faithfully huge. John Cane was the sole writer on that song.
mhm.
Sunder My Love, that's one they still play here and there. Chain Reaction. Some of the songs you mentioned before, same thing. Yeah, so they do dig deeper into this one a lot too, and that's because it is their second, biggest selling album. So they know they can't go wrong there since it sold that many copies. Everybody's pretty much familiar with all those songs, even the ones that don't get much love anymore. All right, so that's going to take us down to the top 4.
Yeah, my number 4 is Escape. I mean, it's a great album. I mean, it sold like 10 million copies for a reason. I mean, Don't Stop Believing, I'm kind of sick of, but it's still. I mean, I do love the song, but I'd be okay if I didn't hear it again. I mean, I've Stone in Love is great. I think my favorite song on it is Mother Father. I think that's like the kind of the deep cut here. I mean, I know when they played it live in Buffalo, Dean Castronova sings it, and I think he crushes it every time. It's
Yeah.
just and even like when Journey put out the live from Houston album from '81, that's a killer version that Steve Perry sings on that also. And I mean, Open Arms is a great closer. The title track Escape is great. I mean, even Steve Perry just contributed to the Dolly Parton rock album, and they did a cover of Open Arms on that too, which is kind of interesting. But
All right, so that's number 4 for you. My number 4 is none other than the 1986 released Raised on Radio, which when it came out, I think it caught a lot of people by surprise, including myself, because of the fact, you had Escape, and you get Frontiers, and then all of a sudden you get Raised on Radio. But even though it seemed like a letdown to some people, I actually got it ranked one slot higher than Frontiers. Um, not sure. I just think overall, I just like Raised on Radio just a smidge better. I mean, obviously the lead single and lead track to Radio was "Be Good to Yourself." That was good, and then they played like a couple singles off of it. "Girl Can't Help It" was big, but yeah, that's one that's good, but but I like I'll Be All Right Without You. That one to me was totally a different flavor, a different vibe for Journey, but it's good. It's something that you never forget. You stick. I don't know, something about that song I just like. Um, Why Can't This Night Go On Forever is another deep cut that I feel is really good. Positive Touch is an interesting type of song, the way that one goes, and obviously this was the album, that Ross Valerie left before they even recorded it. Steve Smith was fired during the recording of it. They did have him on 2 tracks before they let him go because he was disappointed with the music direction and didn't want to tour off of it. And there was a whole then, and that's kind of like where all these problems started with those two, Valerie and Smith. And then, sure enough, it comes back to the forefront how many years later, just a few years ago, when Neal fired them both again.
Yeah.
So, what can you say? But double platinum, reached number 4, and it's my number 4. So that's going to take us to our top 3.
Yeah. My number 3 is the Journey, the first one from '75. I mean, I love the instrumental pieces. I mean, they definitely focused on some longer arrangements here. There's some close to 7-minute songs on here.
Mm-hmm.
They're not totally not made for the radio. They're just made to, like, this is kind of helping you just got to put it on and listen to it from front to back. Just kind of take in the experience because and George Tickner is the only album he was on, which it's a fun album to listen to. I mean, Of a Lifetime is great. That's still one that's kind of, they still like hold it in high esteem within the catalog. Like, I know, like, Mystery Mountain closes out the record. I like that too a lot. So, and that's one of the shorter songs on it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you can hear the seeds of from Santana on this album the most, I think, out of all of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Me and you both picked that one to be the higher one of the first 3. Um, that's interesting. But I mean, do you think a lot of it has to do with Tickner? Do he have? You think he has any? Since he's like, once he left the album, the group, this wasn't even though the other 4 guys are all still there. It just was a little different without him. Do you feel that maybe that had a little bit to do with it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because it's weird how that album does stand out a lot more than the other 2.
Yeah,
The other 2
I
are a
mean,
little
even
bit. Mhm.
I was thinking, even like, if like to truly celebrate the 50th anniversary of Journey, I feel like they didn't really go as deep into the catalog as they could have, because they called it a 50th anniversary tour, but they didn't really celebrate every era as equally as they should have. But
They didn't they do something like back in like when Jerry was in the band, they kind of did something where they did go back in time. Journey through, I forgot what they called it back then. They did do something. I think they came to Derry and my brother went to it, and it was like a full night of just Journey, and then they went deep and all kinds of things. But for some reason, I just never went to that one.
yeah.
I don't know. But that I do believe something like that they did back then, but why wouldn't they repeat it exactly? I mean, 50 years, you're never going to get another chance to do that again.
Mhm.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so that's your number 3. Mine is going to be, surprisingly, this is going to surprise you that I haven't mentioned this one yet, but a non-Steve Perry album at number 3. What am I thinking? Do I have to have my temperature taken or something here? But that's the case. Revelation 2008. I don't know. Something about this album. I just really, it seems like John Cane is probably some of his best writing in years on this album. You can, see the Cane influence and hear
Hmm.
it in many of these songs, but nothing more so than After All These Years. What a great song about reminiscing there. Great song. That song to me is probably one of the best songs he ever wrote. And it's a shame they don't do it live anymore. I know John did his little keyboard medley type thing a couple years back. He actually played it during that, which was pretty cool, but it was just like an instrumental only. But Never Walk Away, Wildest Dream, What I Needed, great stuff here. Um, Matter of fact, the album really, until not the only ones I when I get down near the end, the last two songs on the album are the only ones that I could have, you know, can do without. But the rest of them, the album, very solid all the way through. For some reason, I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. It's really a solid album, and out of all their other albums, this is the third most solid album in my estimation. So that was, and that album reached number 5. But like you said, it was a Walmart release. I don't know if that had a lot to do with it, but at the same time, it did go platinum for what it's
Yeah.
worth. Their last platinum album. So, all right, number 2.
Yeah. Number 2, going with Departure. I always love this album. I think Any Way You Want It is great, but that's like the only song off here that really gets any attention anymore. But there's some great stuff on here. I mean, Someday Soon is great. People and Places, Good Morning Girl, Line of Fire. I think this is a it's a hard rocker album. I think Neal Schon was inspired by a lot of Thin Lizzy for the way he constructed Any Way You Want It, like the simple riffs, and it's always a catchy song. But I think this is one of those albums that's aged well. I think it's kind of a dark horse of the catalog a little bit because it's not one that people talk about too much. But I think if you go back and listen to it all the way through, there's some really good stuff here.
Yeah, I actually just listened to it today, and man, I was surprised because I was looking at it. I go, man, oh man, it seemed better to me than I had realized. Just not enough to move it up much in my ranking, no, from where it was. But yeah, I agree. It's a solid album, and that was just I called it a, I think mine was at number 7, and I said albums 7 on down were good. So that's about exactly where that one came into play. So that was absolutely right. All right. So that was your number 2. My number 2 is one we haven't actually talked about yet. So that would be Infinity. Came out in 1978, the very first album with Mr. Steve Perry on vocals. Reached number 21, 3 times platinum. Interesting notes about this was at the time of Next and Infinity, by the time this album was getting written, they actually hired a different vocalist to sing, and that was going to be Robert Fleischman, who went on to go sing with the Vinnie Vincent Invasion and other bands that nobody really ever heard of. But
Mm-hmm.
Fleischman, he actually wrote a couple songs on here because at that point he was still in the band as a member. So obviously they still had to give him the songwriting credit when they kept the songs, including Wheel in the Sky. He gets a co-write for. So this guy definitely, he could write some songs. He definitely wrote a couple of, to get a co-writing credit on Wheel in the Sky. That's pretty good. Um, I'll just name a couple on here that stand out for me on this one. Obviously feeling that way in any time, the two songs that Perry and Greg Rowley share together. And that's actually the one I actually was a guest DJ on 97 Rock, and I played those two songs together, and that was awesome to be able to do that. Um, and then I'll just mention one more, the dark horse on the album, the underrated song that I don't know why nobody ever plays this song. You never hear it anywhere, but Patiently, probably one of the greatest songs Steve Perry has ever sung. Just amazing how you just don't ever hear that song anywhere, really. It's just weird. I don't
Yeah.
understand it. I mean, yeah, great that that doesn't get overplayed like Don't Stop Believing, like you mentioned. You can do without hearing that one. But Patiently is definitely very, very, very underrated. As great of a song as it is, it should have been bigger for sure, in my estimation. And it was also the last album to feature Ainsley Dunbar on drums. So that's the only last note I have about that album before we take it over to number 1.
Yeah, yeah. Infinity's my number
Yeah.
1. So yeah, I mean, I've always loved this album. I don't think there's a bad song on it. I mean, adding Perry to the mix, you knew the band was going to take it to another level. I think I always love the songs where Greg and Steve sing together. I think their voices kind of play off each other really well. And I mean, the production's great. The playing is great. It's got that kind of it's kind of the bridge between the '70s journey and what would come to the '80s, and I think it works really well. It's one of my favorite albums. So.
Yep. Yep. I had a feeling that was gonna be your top album once I didn't hear you mention it really. So, but yep, that's that's good because that was my number 2 and your number 1. So we're pretty much in agreement on that one. And the only thing that's going to separate your number 1 from mine for me is Escape, which I mentioned early on. That's the album that, that got me into the band back in the day when it came out in 81. Couldn't escape radio back then, hearing, they played pretty much what didn't they play off of it on the radio? 97 Rock used to just crank, crank, and crank it. It's weird. How did Don't Stop Believin' become a bigger song now than it was back then? I'll never know. And that's why we're probably sick of hearing it, because you hear it everywhere, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, when the Sopranos used it in their finale, that you brought it back to the mainstream again. So that was a big moment. So
Yeah, you don't usually hear too many songs becoming bigger than they were. But I mean, you got to remember back then for that song there, Don't Stop Believin', was number 9 on the charts.
yeah,
But the way it got brought back to life, man, you thought it was it's just weird that a song that never topped the charts ended up coming back bigger really in estimation than it was when it came out as a single.
yeah.
Um, all right, so let's see. We got 1, we got 2, 3. So four top 40 hits on it, with Open Arms hitting number 2, Who's Crying Now hitting number 4, Don't Stop Believing at number 9. And then, of course, Still They Ride, another great song on this album that kind of hides down later on in the album at number 19. I really like Perry's vocal on that song as well. That was one of the standouts as well for this album here. Interesting on this one as well was the fact that it's their only Diamond album. It did reach number 1. It was the first album with Jonathan Cain, and that's where I think the band really started coming into their own songwriting. Cain, the addition of Jonathan Cain was what helped get this band to that level. The mix of him, Sean, and Perry just composing these songs and writing them, and man, wow, these guys just did a phenomenal job. There's no doubt how how adding John Cain to the mix really changed the fortunes of the band. So, yeah, that's what you got there for number 1 for me is Escape. And any last thoughts on this catalog?
No, I think this was a fun one to do because I don't. It's one of those catalogs where there's not like maybe a consensus number 1 that you pretty much can predict right off the bat that everybody's going to love. I think there's a lot of variety here. So
Yeah, I mean, you were close on a lot of our choices in a way, maybe not dead on, but we were close in the ballpark pretty much. A few of them we were off on, but that was, more so I guess it all depends on taste. And like you said, you went back, you weren't around during the 70s, obviously, but you went back and you found those albums to be quite satisfying. Um, I was around in the 70s, but I was a kid, but I don't really, they didn't play them on the radio. Like you said, those were the albums, those first 3 are the ones you just got to
yeah,
put on and you got to absorb them and feel and play them all the way through. And that's exactly, you described that to a T on how you enjoyed that first album for sure. All right. Sounds good. So, yeah, there you go. There's our Journey ranking, and we'll see what we got coming up on down the road here. It was good having you on again after a little bit of
yeah.
a hiatus there. And hope to see you again for another episode down the road here.
All right. Yeah.
All right,
Thanks.
thanks.